All right, so we're diving into the world of the Indian rupee today. And wow, you sent over a ton of articles and web pages.
Hmm.
I've got to say, this currency, it's like it has more stories than a Bollywood film.
I love that comparison. The Bollywood analogy, that's pretty spot on. The rupees definitely had its fair share of drama over the years. Actually it dates back to the 16th century, like way back to the Mughal Empire.
Okay, so we're talking ancient history here. Were they like trading rupees while wearing those fancy Mughal turbans?
Well, maybe not those exact turbans, but the word rupee, it actually comes from the Sanskrit word rupya, which means, get this, wrought silver. So yeah, back then it was all about those silver coins.
So if I hopped in a time machine, I could, like, buy a samosa with a silver rupee. That's kind of awesome. But I'm guessing things have gotten, a little more complex since then?
Oh, yeah, definitely way more complex. It's not just about bartering anymore. The rupee's gone through these different phases of what's called convertibility. Basically, it means how easily you can swap it for other currencies. For a while, it was pretty much non-convertible, so it was kind of like stuck on the sidelines of the global scene.
Stuck on the sidelines. That doesn't sound very Bollywood-like, more like, I don't know, a slow classical music piece or something. So how did it break free?
Well, India gradually shifted to this thing called partial convertibility, especially on what's called the current account.
Mhm.
That means if you're an Indian resident, you can trade rupees for foreign currency for things like, I don't know, travel expenses, imports, maybe that online course you've been wanting to take.
Okay, so that's for everyday stuff, current account convertibility. But what about if I wanted to like invest a ton of money in a foreign company? Say I want to buy a big chunk of that tech giant everyone's talking about.
Ugh. See, that falls under capital account convertibility, and that's where things get a bit more restricted. India still has some rules in place there to protect its economy, from those sudden huge flows of money going in and out. Think of it like a safety net to prevent any big financial wobbles.
So it's like India wants the rupee to be out there mingling with other currencies, but it also wants to make sure things stay stable back home. Makes sense. But here's a question. Does India, like, have any plans to make the rupee this global superstar? Go head to head with the dollar or the yuan?
That's a question a lot of people are asking. India's economy is definitely growing, and they have been doing things to raise the rupee's profile internationally. Things like what's called the Liberalized Remittance Scheme, or LRS. And then there's this thing called the International Financial Services Center, or IFSC.
Those names sound pretty serious. What do those things actually do?
So the LRS, it makes it easier for people living in India to invest in foreign stuff, assets, send money abroad too. Though obviously there are some limits. And then the IFSC, well, the goal is for it to become this major global financial hub, attract those big international players, and that should help boost the rupee's visibility on the world stage.
So it's like India's setting the stage for the rupee to join the big leagues. But let's be real for a second. How does it actually compare to those heavy hitters, like the US dollar?
It's a bit of a David and Goliath situation for sure, but hey, the rupee's got its own strengths. The problem is there are these challenges. Like, one is liquidity, meaning how easily you can buy and sell it globally. And then there's full convertibility. That's still a big factor if it wants to be a truly global currency.
So, yeah, some hurdles to clear. Makes it interesting, though, right? Keeps things exciting. Okay,
Okay.
I got to know who's calling the shots when it comes to the rupee. Like, who's the mastermind behind all this?
That would be the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI for short. You can think of them as the guardians of India's economy, always watching over the rupee, making sure it stays on a steady course.
I'm picturing a room full of super smart economists, surrounded by screens, charts going crazy. What exactly do they do to keep everything running smoothly?
Well, they've got a lot on their plate. First, there's controlling inflation. Got to make sure those samosas don't get too expensive. And then there's supporting economic growth so people have enough money to buy those samosas in the first place. And then they have to maintain financial stability. That way the whole samosa market doesn't,
The
collapse.
samosa market collapse. Now, that's a headline I never want to see. Okay, but seriously, how do they actually pull all that off? Is there like a secret economic magic wand they use?
No magic wand, but they do have some pretty powerful tools. For example, there's this thing called the repo rate. It's the interest rate the RBI uses when it lends money to those regular commercial banks.
Hold on, I feel like we're getting into some serious financial jargon here. Can you break that down for us, regular folks?
Sure, sure. Basically, the repo rate, it's a way for the RBI to control how much money banks have to lend out. It's like adjusting the flow of money through the whole economy.
So, like, if they want to boost things, they lower the repo rate. Makes it cheaper for banks to borrow,
Yeah.
and then they can lend more money.
Exactly. And if they want to cool things down a bit, they just raise the repo rate. Borrowing gets a bit more expensive. It's all about finding that sweet spot for, nice steady growth.
Okay, so the RBI, it's like the DJ for the Indian economy. They're constantly tweaking the music to keep everyone dancing at the right pace.
I like that. The DJ analogy. But managing interest rates, that's not all they do. They've also been busy reforming the whole banking sector, making it more robust, making sure it's reliable.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. They've got this thing called a bad bank. Sounds kind of like a financial detox program.
Yeah. Officially, it's called the National Asset Reconstruction Company Limited. But yeah, bad bank definitely gets the point across. It's basically a separate entity. And what it does is it takes on all those bad loans from banks that are struggling.
So it's like giving those banks a clean slate, a chance to start fresh.
Exactly. It helps them, clean up their balance sheets, lets them focus on lending to those healthier businesses. It's all about making the whole financial system stronger.
All right, so the RBI, they're keeping things in check with, traditional banking. But what about that shiny new thing everyone's talking about, the digital rupee? Is India ready to dive headfirst into the world of crypto?
Well, it's not quite a full-on crypto dive just yet.
Yeah.
There are two main types of digital rupees that are being talked about. First, there's this thing called a central bank digital currency. That's a CBDC for short. It's basically like a digital version of the regular rupee, issued and controlled by, you guessed it, the RBI.
So it's like trading physical rupees for digital ones.
Yeah.
But the RBI is still in charge.
Exactly. In fact, they're running a pilot project with this e-rupee right now, seeing how it goes. But then there's the other type of digital rupee. This one's more like your typical cryptocurrency, decentralized, operating independently.
Ah, so Bitcoin's wilder cousin. Something tells me the RBI might not be too thrilled about that one.
Yeah, you're right on the money there. A decentralized public crypto rupee. That would definitely challenge their whole control over the monetary system. But hey, who knows what the future holds? Crypto, it's changing all the time. India's stance could shift, over time.
It's like a financial thriller with a new plot twist every other week.
Yeah.
But okay, enough with the abstract stuff. Let's talk about what matters to, everyday people. What does all this rupee business mean for someone like me who's just trying to figure out this whole investing thing?
Now that's where things get really interesting. India has this whole buffet of investment options, from the super safe to the more adventurous ones.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Let's hear about these options.
All right, so first up, we have those classic fixed deposits. Think of them like, I don't know, the comfortable slippers of the investment world. Reliable, stable, maybe not the most exciting thing. But they offer guaranteed returns, though the interest rates might not, make your heart race.
So perfect for someone who's looking for peace of mind, not those high-risk thrills.
Exactly. And then you've got mutual funds. They pool money from a bunch of different investors and use it to invest in, a diversified portfolio. It's kind of like having a team of experts picking the best stocks and bonds for you.
Ah, so a good option for someone who wants to get into investing but doesn't want to become a financial whiz overnight.
All right. And then, of course, there's always the real estate market. Owning property in India, it's always been seen as like a sign of prosperity, and it can be a solid investment.
Yeah, that good old brick and mortar. But I'm guessing that takes a pretty big chunk of change up front.
That's true. Real estate, it's definitely not for the faint of heart. It takes a lot of capital, and it can be harder to, quickly turn it back into cash compared to other investments. But it can also offer some pretty good returns over time, especially with India's economy growing like it is.
Okay, so we've got those safe options, some diversified ones, and the real estate route. Anything else on this investment menu?
Oh, there's more. Don't forget about government bonds. Those are considered pretty safe, backed by, the government itself. They give you those regular interest payments, so they're good for people who are looking for stability and a little extra income.
Wow, so many choices. It's like being in a financial candy store.
Yeah.
But before we get a sugar rush from all these investment options, let's go back to those global aspirations for the rupee. What are its chances of becoming, one of the big players on the world stage?
That's the billion rupee question. India's economic growth is definitely a point in its favor, and the government's been actively trying to get other countries using it more.
Plus, there are those initiatives we were talking about, the LRS and the IFSC. Those seem like they're pushing things in the right direction. But realistically, what do you think? What are its chances of hitting that, global currency superstar status.
Well, there are still some bumps in the road. The rupee can be pretty volatile. Its value goes up and down, and that can make investors a bit nervous. And the level of convertibility, it's not quite where it needs to be yet to match those big global currencies. Plus, you can't forget about the competition. It's fierce out there.
So yeah, it's a long road ahead. Looks like there'll be opportunities, but definitely some challenges along the way too.
Exactly. But the Indian rupee, it's got this long history of bouncing back. It's adapted over centuries, and it's definitely not done yet.
Okay, well, I'm ready for the next chapter.
Yeah.
But before we move on, there's one more thing I'm curious about. We've talked about a strong rupee versus a weaker one, but what's the ideal situation? What's the sweet spot for the Indian economy?
That's a great question. And it's something that, economists and policymakers are constantly debating, trying to figure out what that perfect balance is.
All right, let's unpack it. What are the pluses and minuses of a strong rupee?
Okay, so on the plus side, a strong rupee usually means imports cost less. Good news for anyone in India who likes to shop. It's like getting a discount on everything, from electronics to fancy ingredients from other countries.
So a strong rupee means I could finally buy that imported coffee machine I've been wanting.
Exactly. And a strong rupee can help keep inflation down. Prices stay stable, your money goes further.
It's like having a superhero protecting you from those price hikes that everyone hates. That's awesome. But you said it's all about balance. So I'm guessing there's got to be another side to this whole strong rupee thing, right? What happens when it gets too strong?
Well, while shoppers might be happy, it can make things tougher for Indian companies that are trying to sell their products to other countries. Their goods become more expensive for buyers overseas, and that can make them less competitive.
So it's kind of like a seesaw? Good for shoppers, but maybe not so great for exporters.
Precisely. It's all about finding that sweet spot where, everybody wins. Or at least, as many people as possible benefit.
It sounds like it's a delicate dance trying to keep everyone happy in the world of economics.
It really is, and it shows how everything's connected. A change in the rupee's value can ripple through the entire economy, even affect things globally.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see the big picture here.
hmm
Are there any other things a strong rupee affects that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, there's the impact on foreign investment. When the rupee is strong, it can actually make it less appealing for investors from other countries to put their money into India. Because when they convert their returns back to their own currency, it ends up being less.
So a strong rupee could actually discourage foreign investment. That's kind of counterintuitive.
It might seem that way, but if you think about it from the perspective of someone who's investing from another country, it makes sense. They want to see their money grow as much as possible.
Okay, I see. So another balancing act. Strong rupee might be good for consumers, but it could scare away those foreign investors. It's a lot to juggle.
You got it. It's a complex puzzle, and the people making decisions about the rupee, they've got to think about all these different pieces.
Wow, this is making me realize there's so much more to the rupee than I ever thought. It's like a whole ecosystem. But now that we've covered the strong rupee, what about the opposite? What happens when the rupee weakens?
Let's take a little trip back in time, trace the rupee's journey, see how it got to where it is today. We talked about those ancient origins back in the Mughal Empire, but there's a lot more to the story.
Ooh, a history lesson.
Ha.
I mean, do you think they had, financial podcasts back in the Mughal era?
Probably not,
Yeah.
but hey, they definitely had those silver rupee coins we talked about, that shiny silver. You know the first one? It was introduced by this guy, Sher Shah Suri, back in the 16th century, and it became super popular, all across the empire. So silver, huh? That was the original rupee. It's kind of cool how that connection to silver has stuck around for so long.
Right. It's even, baked into the word rupee itself. It comes from rupya in Sanskrit. And guess what that means? Wrought silver.
It's like a little history lesson hidden in the name. But then, the British showed up, and I'm guessing things started to change.
Yep, you got it. During the British Raj, they tied the Indian rupee to their currency, the British pound sterling. They also introduced paper money to India back in the 18th century. The first paper rupee, it came out in 1861.
So the rupee went from silver coins to paper money. Talk about a makeover.
It was a big shift. And then in 1957, India switched to the decimal system. So they got rid of that old system with annas and pays. And now it's, 1 rupee equals 100 pays.
Ah, those good old pays. Feels like forever ago. But I'm sure India gaining independence in 1947, that had to be a huge moment for the rupee, right? Definitely. I mean, it became the official currency of the Republic of India. But its journey wasn't over. Then in 1991, India went through this big period of economic liberalization, and that really changed things for the rupee.
Liberalization. Sounds like a good thing. Did it give the rupee a boost?
Well, not right away. The government, they actually devalued the rupee. It was part of that whole liberalization process. So yeah, its value dropped. It was a bit of a roller coaster.
Doesn't sound too fun. Why would they do that? Like, what was the point?
It was strategic.
Yeah.
Even though it might seem, a little strange at first, the goal was to make stuff that India was exporting more competitive, on the global market, and also to attract foreign investment.
So kind of like short-term pain for long-term gain.
Exactly. And as part of this liberalization, in 1993, India introduced the system they have now. It's a managed floating exchange rate. So basically, the rupee's value, it's allowed to move up and down based on what's happening in the market. But the RBI, they step in sometimes, to make sure things don't get too crazy.
Ah, so it's like a dance between letting the market do its thing, but with a little bit of guidance from the government. Makes sense. But speaking of crazy, how's the rupee been handling all the craziness in the world lately? It seems like a lot of currencies have been all over the place.
Yeah, you're not wrong. The global economy, it's been pretty wild. And the rupee, well, it's definitely felt it. In fact, back in April 2020, right when the pandemic was at its worst, it hit a record low against the US dollar.
I remember those headlines. It felt like the whole world was kind of freaking out.
Yeah, it was the time of a lot of uncertainty. No one really knew what was going to happen. But the good news is the rupee's recovered since then. I mean, global things still affect it, like, oil prices or how the US dollar's doing. But India's economy, it's been bouncing back, and that's helped to keep things a bit steadier.
So the rupee's a survivor. But besides how it's doing globally, are there any interesting things happening within India itself? Trends with the rupee.
Well, one trend that's impossible to miss is the rise of digital payments. Have you noticed how everyone in India seems to be using their phones for everything these days?
Oh, absolutely. Even like street food vendors, they have those QR codes now. It's amazing how fast it's taken off.
It's a total digital revolution. The government's been pushing this cashless economy idea, and it's really working. I think it's going to keep changing, how people use the rupee in their everyday lives.
So is physical cash, like, on its way out in India? Will we see a completely digital rupee someday?
Well, we talked about the e-rupee earlier, the RBI's central bank digital currency. They're trying that out right now. But there's another digital player that's been making noise in India, even though the government hasn't been, totally on board with it.
I think I know where you're going with this. Cryptocurrency.
You got it. Bitcoin, Ethereum, all those, they've been gaining popularity in India, even though the regulations haven't really caught up yet. It's definitely something to watch. It could potentially shake things up for the rupee.
So it's like a digital showdown brewing. The rupee versus crypto. This is getting exciting.
It's definitely a story to keep an eye on. The way cryptocurrency is growing in India, it shows how people are, thinking about money and finance in new ways. It's pretty innovative.
This is all so fascinating. But I have to ask, what do you think the future holds for the rupee? Will it become one of those global currency giants? Up there with the dollar and the euro.
Yeah, the million-dollar question. Well, there are definitely some things working in its favor. India's economy is booming, and the government's really trying to get more countries to start using the rupee internationally.
And they've got those initiatives we talked about, like the liberalized remittance scheme and the International Financial Services Center. Seems like those are helping to move things along. But if you had to guess, what are its chances of really becoming a global currency powerhouse?
Honestly, there are still some obstacles. Like I mentioned before, the rupee can be pretty volatile, and that makes investors nervous. And the level of convertibility, it's not quite at the same level as those major currencies yet. Plus, you've got to remember, the competition is intense. It's not going to be easy.
Yeah. So yeah, it sounds like there's a long road ahead. Lots of possibilities, but some tough challenges too.
Exactly. But the Indian rupee, it's been around for centuries. It's resilient. It's adapted to all sorts of changes. And I think its journey is far from over.
Okay, well, I'm ready for the next chapter of this story. But before we jump ahead, there's one more thing I'm wondering about. We talk about a strong rupee versus a weak one. But what's the best case scenario? What would be ideal for the Indian economy?
That's a great question. It's something that economists and policymakers are always trying to figure out. Trying to find that sweet spot. It's all about balance.
All right, let's break it down. What are the pros and cons when the rupee is strong?
So, one of the big advantages of a strong rupee is that it generally brings down the cost of imports. And that's good news for people in India, especially consumers. It's like getting a discount on all sorts of things, from electronics to food from other countries.
So if the rupee is strong, I could finally splurge on that fancy imported coffee machine I've been wanting.
Exactly. And a strong rupee, it can also help to keep inflation under control. So prices stay more stable, and your money, well, it just goes further.
It's like having a shield against those price increases everyone hates. I like it. But you mentioned balance earlier, so I'm guessing there's got to be a downside too, right? What happens if the rupee gets too strong?
Well, when the rupee is super strong, it can make it tougher for businesses in India that are trying to sell their stuff overseas. Their products become more expensive for people in other countries to buy, and that can hurt their competitiveness.
Ah, so it's like a trade-off. Good for people who like to shop, but maybe not so good for exporters.
Exactly. It's all about trying to find that balance where both sides can do well.
It's like a big economic puzzle, and you got to figure out how to make all the pieces fit together.
You said it. It's a complex system, and the people in charge of the rupee, they have a lot to think about when they're making decisions.
Okay, I'm starting to see the big picture here. Are there any other effects of a strong rupee that we haven't talked about yet?
Yes. There's the impact on foreign investment. When the rupee is strong, it can actually discourage investors from other countries from putting their money into India. Because, when they convert their profits back into their own currency, they end up with less.
Wait, so a strong rupee could actually scare away foreign investment? That seems kind of backward.
I know it might seem counterintuitive, but if you look at it from the perspective of someone investing from, say, the US or Europe, it makes sense. They want their money to grow as much as possible.
Ah, okay, I see. So it's another one of those balancing acts. A strong rupee might help consumers, but it could also make foreign investors think twice. It's a lot to juggle.
It really is. It's this complex system, and policymakers, they have to take all these different things into account when they're making decisions about the rupee.
I'm starting to realize just how much goes into managing a currency. It's like this whole intricate web. But we've talked a lot about what happens when the rupee's strong. What about when it weakens?
Well, when the rupee weakens, it can actually make things that India exports more appealing to buyers in other countries. Because, from their perspective, those products become cheaper.
So it's like a giant sale on Indian products for the rest of the world.
Exactly. And that can really boost demand for Indian goods and services, which is good for businesses and the economy as a whole.
But there's got to be a downside, right? Nothing's ever that simple in economics. There's always a trade-off.
You're catching on. A weaker rupee can make those imports more expensive for people in India. So, that imported coffee machine you were talking about, it might suddenly be out of reach.
Ugh. So my dreams of fancy coffee are on hold. But I guess it's all about, supporting local businesses, even if it means skipping out on some of those imported luxuries.
I like that attitude. It's all about finding that balance, right? Supporting those homegrown industries while still, enjoying the benefits of trading with other countries.
It's like this giant economic balancing act, and the rupee is like right in the middle of it all.
Exactly. And the people who are making those policy decisions, they have this really tough job of figuring out how to make it all work, how to create an economy that's stable and prosperous.
Well, I've got to say, I'm feeling a lot more knowledgeable about the rupee now. It's not just some random symbol on my screen. It's like this living, breathing thing that affects everything from, the price of my samosas to what's happening in the global economy.
I'm glad to hear that. The rupee, it's got this fascinating history, and it's definitely got a future ahead of it. There are so many factors that influence it, both within India and globally, and understanding those dynamics is, wow, it's really key.
So basically, stay informed. Keep up with the news, both in India and around the world.
Exactly. And for anyone out there who's thinking about investing in anything related to the rupee, remember, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Diversification is key.
Spread the love. Fixed deposits, mutual funds, real estate, those government bonds we talked about. Mix it up.
Exactly. Do your research, figure out how much risk you're comfortable with, and pick investments that match your goals.
Solid advice. And remember, while the rupee story is super interesting, it's just one part of this huge global financial world. There are all these other currencies and markets out there to explore.
That's right. So stay curious, keep learning, and hey, Who knows, maybe you'll become a rupee expert yourself one day.
That's a great thought to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the Indian rupee. It's been an amazing journey, and hopefully you've learned a thing or two along the way.
The pleasure was all mine. Always happy to talk about currencies.
Until next time, keep those rupees rolling.